G'day, I'm Glenn Quinn from Bard Learning.
And I'm Glenn Hancock from Bard Learning.
And welcome to the Leaders on Leading podcast. This is a podcast for leaders, managers like you who want to learn from other leaders. We've run development programs with many hundreds of leaders in our work at Bard, and we know that some of the most powerful learning happens when leaders are learning from each other. For our first episode, we're very proud to be in conversation with Dominik Chmielewski. Dominik graduated from Brunel University in London in 2000 with a Bachelor of Computer Science, first class, where he was nominated to intern at CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research. He was joint author of a paper on how to better design for users. The paper, titled Disorganisation and How to Support It, Reflections on the Design of Wireless Information Devices, was presented at the Interact conference in Japan 2001. Dom has worked for numerous players in the telecommunications space. He was head of device delivery at Orange, director of buyback and trade-in for Oceania at Brightstar, now Likewise, and director of device sourcing, buyback and trade-in, and regional director global liquidation products at Asurion. He's currently co-founder and COO of the very successful PropTech startup Rental Heroes. Since its creation in 2019, Rental Heroes has raised a very impressive amount of startup capital, was last year's winner of the PropTech Awards Most Innovative PropTech Startup for Efficiency and Optimization, and was finalist for multiple real estate business awards, including Innovator of the Year for an individual and Innovator of the Year in the company category also. Rental Heroes now partners with every major real estate brand in Australia. The platform now looks after over 200,000 tenants across the country. So please enjoy our conversation with Dominik Chmielewski.
Hello.
G'day, mate.
Good morning.
How you going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you guys doing?
All right.
Dom, tell us about Rental Heroes. Tell us about how you started that and what Rental Heroes is. I mean, it's a very, very exciting company. You're doing extraordinarily well.
Yeah. So we had an idea of what we wanted to do, but we were very naive in sort of how we thought that would happen. And luckily we joined an accelerator program, the Blue Chili Stockland Accelerator, which was a 6-month program that really sort of helps businesses or sort of founders take those ideas and make them into sort of a viable business. And so that was fantastic. We got some great introductions through that. We obviously learnt a hell of a lot. And then the business started. We went to a conference, we presented, we had like a 5-minute slot, and our first customer was actually someone at that conference who came up to us afterwards and said, "We really want that product." Yeah, it was a guy from LJ Hooker, and it was huge. That was the turning point, right? And so then we thought, okay, well, we've got to try this. We've got to sort of actively start selling and all those things. And that was sort of 4 years ago, and Rental Heroes is now 10 people, 200,000 tenants on our platform, and we're helping property managers and the real estate agencies really just minimize the amount of low-level issues that they have to deal with. So tenants with their maintenance, tenants with their inquiries, leads that are coming through their websites. We answer all the questions. We take care of everything. We have an AI chatbot that does all of that. And then basically we free up the time of the agent to deal with sort of the more important stuff. So the relationships, the actual closing of the deals, that side of things, rather than picking up the phone and having to deal with, annoying inquiries from tenants where really they should be able to answer that for themselves. So that's our product.
I must say, what I really love about Rental Heroes is it's such a great case study about a value chain and how a business model is like a narrative, and we understand the motivations of each character in the narrative. We've got the real estate agent, we've got the tenant, and it's just absolutely a win for all of them.
And the reality is, unfortunately, if you speak to a tenant, pretty much everyone will say something like they think their property manager is useless, which is absolutely not true, but that is their perception of things.
Right.
And typically, a property manager will say things like, "My tenants are really annoying." Right? They basically, both parties don't really like each other, and so we're trying to sort of make that experience as pleasant as possible for everyone.
Yeah, that's incredible, that, isn't it? Because you might look at that I mean, less innovative minds, Dom, might look at that and say, well, goodness me, that's a hard problem to solve. If that relationship is fraught from the get-go, simply because of the interests of both parties are sort of at loggerheads, and to create a solution that bridges that is really quite something. Well done.
Thank you very much.
And so I noticed that Rental Heroes has won quite a lot of awards as well. Like we've got PropTech Award 2022 Most Innovative PropTech Startup Efficiency and Optimization. Goodness me.
So yeah, we've been really lucky. We've been going through the awards for the last 2 years. So 2021, a few nominations and finalists in sort of PropTech innovation categories, and then in 2022, the PropTech Awards. Which was fantastic, really great sort of recognition comes from that. And obviously you use that when you're sort of communicating about your business and people sort of gravitate towards those kinds of things and the reputation that it gives you. And it's, I guess it's flattering for us that, you know, we are not veterans of real estate. You know, we're from completely different backgrounds. We've only been doing this for a relatively short period of time, and already you can get some kind of recognition. So so it's fantastic that's happened.
So Dom, it was just the two of you, is that right, at the very beginning, setting up the business?
Yes, that's right. It was myself and Ben. Yeah.
So how was that? I mean, people often think about leadership. It's about leading a team. You've got a whole team of people doing this stuff for you. What was it like leading yourselves, basically, and leading a whole new startup and keeping yourselves motivated to move it forward?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question because, you know, leadership, I think people sort of think, leadership is just, you know, this team management piece. But I think, Glenn, you're absolutely right. Like leadership for us was a year and a half of just myself and Ben trying to work out what it is that we're going to do, how we're going to sort of split that, how we're going to motivate ourselves for, you know, through all the sort of the trials and tribulations that you face on the way, and then kind of, you know, once you start that process, you sort of you sort of carve yourself a bit of a niche. It's like, okay, well, I'm gravitating towards, say, the product side of things. Ben was gravitating more towards the management of the business in general and the sales side of things. And so slowly, that's how you sort of find your position in things. At least that's how it was for us. It wasn't like we didn't sit down and go, okay, Ben, you're doing sales, Dom, you're doing it. Like it wasn't that clear cut, but very quickly that becomes apparent. And then once we'd sort of gone down that path and got to a point where it was too big for just the two of us, which was say 18 months worth of time, that's when then you start to bring new people on board. And that's when sort of that different type of leadership kicks in, which is, okay, how do I get this person to be as passionate about this business as I am? How do I get them to understand how we want things to be done? Like not as in micromanaging them, but at the same time, 18 months does set a bit of a precedent as to how you want to operate. And they sort of have to try and fit in with that, right? And our first employees were offshore employees, right? This was COVID, this was remote working. So we ended up hiring, our first employee was, you know, someone based in the Philippines. So that presented a whole lot of challenges as well, right? It's not like we sat in a room and had endless coffees and you know, got to know each other. It was just a call, and that was that.
You know, you've done a lot in leadership over your years, Dom, and I'm interested to know, I guess, when you're in that situation and it's your job to fire them up and get them invested in the vision that you're trying to build. But then there's that saying that no one's ever going to care about your business as much as you do. Beyond finding the right person, when you've done that to the best of your ability, how do you fire them up about your vision?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, I don't think it's something that you just sit there one day and say X, Y, and Z, and that results in, you know, this wonderful human with this wonderful behavior.
Right. Yeah.
I think what happens is if you as individuals are getting on well, understanding sort of what that vision is. You know, so for us, Rental Heroes was about, you know, have this fantastic AI that was going to be able to answer these conversations, take care of everything, be really accurate, etc., etc. And then someone joins you and they're going to help you build that product, and they realize that actually to get to that point, there's a huge long list of things that need to be done. And so I think the leadership part is if you can explain the goal and they share that vision, then the leadership part then is sort of just maneuvering and helping and assisting that person to get there, right? They know what they want to do. They know that, I don't know, they might want to focus on optimizing this AI, or they might want to focus on some process or whatever it might be. And so I think the leadership is not to sort of say, well, today we've got to do this and tomorrow you've got to do that and everything else, but you've got to say, yep, you understand the vision, I trust you. And I think that's a big part of it, is that trust element. Off you go. Let's touch base as often as we need to make sure that it's working and it's going in the right direction. Do you need any assistance? That sort of stuff. So for me, it's quite fluid and quite open, rather than, here's a process, here are the steps, do this, do that.
It sounds like getting them to understand it, and I guess appreciate how this could be a valuable solution to all the parties involved, both of your customer categories. And then when you've got that, it's just a question of making sure that you get out of their way and allowing them to focus their attention wherever they feel like they want to focus their attention. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. I think, there are external factors that help drive where that attention is going to go. So I remember one time I was sitting with one of our team members, and we were doing a conference call with a customer, and we were just talking about sort of the product and what they wanted and everything else. And they just started raving on about how good Alex is. It was really bizarre. Like we weren't trying to solicit this feedback. We were just genuinely just talking about stuff.
Alex, for the listeners, is the name you give to the central AI component of your platform.
Alex is the name of the chatbot. That's right. And they just started to really be super excited about what Alex is doing and how he's helping and this, that, and the other. And so the team member that was with me, I think they, with the call finished and everything else, they turned around and said, wow, wasn't that just the best call? And it was yeah, and that to me is part of that leadership element as well, because they're not just listening to you saying, this is the wonderful thing that we need to achieve. They're actually hearing others, who are completely impartial and outside of this, saying those things as well. And because they're party, and I think this is the beauty of startups, right? Because you're small, so everyone can be almost part of everything. Because they hear that, which maybe in a large corporate, they wouldn't have heard that, right? Because it might just be an account manager hearing that stuff, and they may be relaying back. And that may be relayed back through an email, right? So it loses its sort of excitement, its shininess. Whereas when you're there listening to the call and the customer's super passionate and you literally get off the call and talk about it there and then, that's gold. That's amazing. You can't create that moment. And so that to me is what really then motivates them, gets them excited, makes them think about their own thing. Like we had a whole conversation about, okay, well, let's try and do this and let's do that. And so yeah, it just sort of just rolls on from there. It's great.
I love this idea. It sounds like that came directly from your giving them the ownership and the autonomy to say, here's all the wonderful things you can do. Here's what we need you to do. Here's where we need to go. How do you want to take us there? That freedom seems to be a big part of it. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's really nice for me when I hear them come back to me about something that I didn't even think about, and I think, wow, that is an awesome idea. So off you go and do that. So they feel even more empowered, right? Because they brought something to the table. Everyone's sort of blown away by the idea, and off they go. And it might be a small thing. It doesn't have to be just something that turns the business upside down. It might be like a small improvement to a process, or it might be something that improves the product. As long as it's motivating them and it's what the business needs, well, that's a fantastic outcome.
So Dom, you mentioned, freedom and letting them go, and they're going to come up with great ideas and figure out how to get to where they need to go. I imagine though, after a year and a half of doing it your way and knowing the business inside out and having a certain way of doing things, it would have been a bit of an adjustment to then be able to trust people to take your business and forward. So how did you find that moment of sort of letting go and letting other people find their own way forward?
Yeah, so I must admit I am probably sort of more in the let's do it my way camp. Like I think it should be done like this. But I think with experience, you realise that that's just not how you're going to get the best out of people. And so I guess it's hard to let go, but you have to. Like it's the only way. Like there's only so much bandwidth you have as a human, right? And if you're constantly trying to be across everything, well, A, that's not great for your team. B, it's not great for you because there's only so much you can do, right? And for your business to grow, yes, you want to be involved, you want to be across everything, but you have to sort of pitch that at the right level to not sort of say, oh, I don't care what goes on, because you do care. But at the same time, not be sort of meddling in every little thing, right? And I think that just takes time and experience to learn that skill.
We always say in our leadership development programs, you can't have a conversation about leadership without having a conversation about delegation, and you can't have a conversation about delegation without having a conversation about trust, and you can't have a conversation about trust without having a conversation about failure. And I think we often see this in leaders all the time, that their personal attitude to failure sort of gets transmitted through their entire team. If they're not okay with failure, then they're not going to allow their people to fail, which means they're going to be so afraid and white knuckle grip everything they do. It really just gets down to allowing them the space to fail, because you have the systems and the techniques and the skills to handle it when they do.
And I absolutely agree. And startup is a lot of failure, right? There's a lot of things that go wrong, whether that be external factors or internal factors, small mistakes, just missteps with how you manage something, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of that. So yeah, you do have to be sort of thick-skinned enough to deal with the immediate problems of that failure, but not let that sort of take over everything that you do, right? People do make mistakes. That doesn't mean that you don't let them carry on trying to be them. But yeah, at the same time, sometimes it's not for certain people, and so that's okay as well, right? Then you sort of part ways, and they move on to the next thing, and you move on to the next thing. So yeah, it's not always going to be perfect.
I love what you just said about people do make mistakes, and it doesn't mean you don't let them carry on being them. I think that's really lovely. Can you tell me a little bit about, let's say we're in a team together and I've just made a stuff up and it's had a bit of impact, and what's your little step-by-step game plan about how you approach that as a leader? It might be something that is so old for you now that you've even forgotten, but what do you do and don't do to respond to that effectively?
So we actually had something happened recently where basically we were working on a new version of the product. So we were testing things, but it was actually connected to one of our customers' systems. And unfortunately, so basically prior to doing this testing, we said to the team, we're testing, make sure you don't do anything with these things because we don't want it to go to the customer. And someone slipped up, right? Someone slipped up and it did go through to the customer. And the customer, to another team member, straight on the phone, complained and everything else. And then we have a weekly call where we review things. And so, of course, it eventually trickled through to everyone, and it was brought up at that call.
Right.
So I was on the call. It was brought up as in this customer's complained, what happened, what's going on. And then the person that made the mistake was also on the call. And so I'd already spoken to the person and said what happened, and they said what happened. And I said, okay, well, mistakes happen, let's move on, it's all good. When it came up, I didn't want to have that discussion again. I really think there was no need. Like, it'd been dealt with, we understood why. It wasn't some systematic failure, it was just human error. It'd been dealt with. So I just shut it down straight away. It's like, look, it's been dealt with, it was a mistake. Everyone knows what happened, we can just move on. And so I didn't want that person to go through that whole review again. I didn't think it was going to achieve anything. And yeah, I think that was the right approach in that situation, was to just, we don't dwell on this any further. It's been dealt with.
And it's a lot, yeah, I mean, I don't want to harp on trust, but it's almost like you trust the conversation that you had already is enough to do the job.
And you know when your employee makes a mistake versus when your employee is failing, right? So if a team member is constantly having problems, well, that's a very different situation to a team member that occasionally slips up, right? So when it's those slip ups, you just have to move on. When it's a team member that's failing, well, then that's something that you have to approach in a different way.
I'm interested. Well, I'm interested to know. You mentioned little slip ups is fine. There's a team member that's failing a lot. I wonder if we can talk about those team members for a moment, in terms of about what happens when you recognise that those constant failures. How do you deal with those situations to rectify it or find a way forward with that particular team member? Yeah,
look, it's really hard. That's the sort of the bottom line of that sort of situation. There's no easy outcome, and it's it's just unpleasant for everyone to have sort of a tough conversation. I would say the startup world versus corporate world handles that kind of situation in a very different way. So in a corporate world, I think there's lots of processes, there's performance reviews, there's these meetings, there's this, that, and the other, and you sort of that process might play out over many months, and it's quite formal, and maybe HR are involved and all that sort of stuff. In the startup world, you are the performance review, you are HR, you are everything in like right there and then. And so I think in a way it makes it easier, because I guess it can be dealt with in a more streamlined way. In a way it makes it harder, because you have to be really careful, right? You're trying to fix things. You don't want to upset that person. You don't want to make the situation any worse. And I think quite a lot the outcome of that conversation is really down to the person themselves. So once you've sort of talked about what the issue is, it's up to them to sort of say what they think happens next. Some people will sort of recognize what's happened and almost tell you what they think they'll do next, and you sort of agree with that or don't. Other people will sort of shut down, maybe become defensive, all that sort of stuff. And so then it's like a cultural thing, right? Is it like, well, do we continue in this relationship, or should we just cut our losses? And maybe in startup land, this is where it's easier, because you can just cut those losses like very quickly, right? And that's happened. Both of those sort of things have happened in our world, like where we've had to let people go, and where we've talked about things, moved on, and that person has done a lot better. And sometimes it can be, quite often it can be an underlying issue that's causing that's actually not related to work. And again, once you have that conversation, once you've tried to, like we've had a lot of people, for example, say that they wish to quit. They don't actually want to quit. They want to change their hours, but they don't know how to approach you and say that. So they're just like, for some reason they think it's much easier to go from 0 to 100 than to do, halfway and have a conversation and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we do something about it? And I don't know, I would hope I'm approachable enough for someone to have that conversation, but for whatever reason, it hasn't gone that way. And so you get to that conversation where it's like, well, I'm quitting, and then you start talking about, well, what are the reasons why, what's going on, is everything okay, et cetera, and once you delve a bit deeper, you find out that actually they're happy, they're fine, everything's okay, they just can't work 40 hours a week, they want to work 20 hours a week, or whatever it might be. And then it's like, well, no problem, like we'll change, we can try and, like, we want you to stay, we want you to be happy, we'll work out 20 hours a week. And then you make that change, and you instantly see them respond to that and change, and all these problems that they were having suddenly go away. So that's sometimes the issue that you're experiencing is not actually the issue, it's just how the underlying root cause is manifesting itself. And
I love it.
And that's human. I guess that's human behavior, right? Which maybe we struggle to be honest, and so we do these other weird things to try and communicate what our message is.
That's so true, and we see that every single day in our work, Dom. Like it's how to onionize a problem with a person and get really to the heart of the matter. And we often find that leaders, when they're coached through that process to do precisely that, they can see that every crucial conversation or interventionist conversation is actually an opportunity to understand what's the root, as you say, the root cause. And it's usually something that can be solved very easily. It's a beautiful thing. I really want to thank you for underlining that, because it's one of our big passions, is to teach people to do precisely that. Yeah.
And I think I don't know what the stats are, but the majority of the problems that a business experiences where there is this sort of like behavioral type issue is because of that, right? It's solvable stuff. It's just the communication is getting in the way, right? Or it's not being done efficiently, or yeah.
The Leaders on Leading podcast is proud to be sponsored by Equi Energy Youth. Equi Energy Youth exists to save young lives. Instances of psychological distress, self-harm, and suicide in young people are devastating for communities across Australia. Often, community members simply don't know what to do when our kids are having challenges with their mental health. Equi Energy Youth is a non-profit and charity that coaches adults in simple ways to recognise the earliest warning signs of when a child is not coping, and how to effectively respond to them through episodes of psychological distress, and reduce the intensity and frequency of episodes of psychological distress in young people. Think of the Dr. ABC framework that makes it simple for us to assess and respond to an emergency situation, and imagine the tragic results that would have followed if that system simply didn't exist. Well, until now, there hasn't been anything similar for mental health, despite the impact poor mental health can have. Equi Energy Youth's TAR-free psychological first aid model gives us a simple process to follow to support a young person through a psychological crisis. TAR-free psychological first aid has been considered the equivalent of Dr. ABC for mental health episodes, and is being used by thousands of adults to support the young people in their lives when they need that support the most. You can learn TAR-3 for free today at eeyouth.org.au and become a safe and effective responder for the kids in your life. That's eeyouth.org.au.
And you also mentioned often they'll come to you with a bit of an idea of what to do next, or a solution, or a way forward. How do you get them to that, Dom?
Look, I think in startup world, again, that's probably easier, because the culture of the business is just, if you sort of think it, just say it. Like, it's okay. You can, you don't have to sort of sit there setting up this environment for communication with workshops and whatever else, because every day is basically a workshop in a startup type environment, right? You're just dirty and working on everything all so you just say it, right? And it's fine, and that's okay. And so the ideas come out easily. I would say in my corporate, when I look back on my corporate career, ideas had to be, you had to sort of set up a day, and maybe it was an offsite, and there'd be, an event afterwards, and it'd be pre-planned 3 months in advance, and then there'd be all this spotlight of pressure on, okay, well, let's do all this, right? And so the ideas would sort of almost be, what's the word? Like, concentrated to only those events that enable the ideas to happen. That's not strictly true, of course. People can have ideas outside of that, but that's how maybe corporates approach that. Whereas, in startup, it's like the issues happen every day. The ideas happen every day. The discussions happen. Like, it's just that workshop is just playing out constantly, basically.
So it sounds like you've set up the expectation that people will do that. They will come to you with ideas and innovations and way of doing things, and they know that that's what you want from them.
Yeah, and maybe even one step further is sometimes you don't even need to discuss it, right? Just do it. Like, we trust you enough. Like, we want to trust you enough that if that means you have to spend a little bit of money buying something, or you have to change something, or this document is no longer fit for purpose, you're going to write a new one, and you're going to say communicate that to the customer straight away. Again, that's okay. Like, in a corporate, you'd probably have to go through some process, right? In a startup, it's just like, you trust your employees. There isn't enough time for everyone to sit there mulling over everything. So let's just get on with it. So, and again, I think the balance is for people to know where they think they have that autonomy, or they believe they have that autonomy, and where they need to maybe check something with you. And that's the hard part, right? Getting that to all sort of work.
We talk a lot about parental leadership, and I know you and I were talking before we started recording about this fine line between being present and being visible to a team and meddling with that team.
Yeah.
And I really love for our listeners to get a sense of what it takes to journey from being a meddling leader or a micromanager to letting go, stepping back, because it can be very frightening if you have those trust issues in your team and perhaps a limited attitude towards failure. What's involved in taking the journey, crossing that bridge between being a micromanager to having trust and letting them go?
Yeah, I think it's a maturity thing in yourself to understand that is the right way to do it. We talked a little bit earlier about sort of the trust of the employee with the employee and sort of the environment that you're in that sort of enables that to happen. But I think also, look, the reality is you have to make some mistakes on the way, right? And I've personally made mistakes in the past where I thought the right thing to do was to try and do everything myself and to be sort of involved in everything. And then sort of on the periphery, I could see that other people were doing it differently, and they were doing bigger and better things and getting further, say, up the career ladder than I was, even though I thought I was doing all the right things. But I had my blinkers on and I was not seeing the wood for the trees and all those anecdotes, whatever. I was just doing my thing, and I wasn't sort of maybe thinking about the bigger picture. And I think once you sort of step back and you think about those, that what's the best thing for the business and what's the best thing for your team, and how are you going to get there? Once you start thinking about that, rather than, today there's 12 things that need to be done, I'm just going to do those 12 things. That's just the quickest way to get from A to B. I think once you step back from that immediate issue to sort of the longer term view, then that's when you start to realize that you've got to step back, you've got to let go, you've got to build some trust, you've got to find the right people that want to work with you to get to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And once those bits start falling into place, it just organically grows as well, right? There's no hard or fast rule about how it's going to happen, but you just, the team starts to work a certain way. We some people want to go out for lunch, some people don't want to. It's all these little things, right? And then eventually you sort of work it all out, and it works, right? The machine just works on its own.
And you mentioned that there were those days when you sort of felt as if you had to be the one doing everything, and it was just an endless laundry list of stuff that needed to be done, rather than a long view about what the team needs in order to succeed. Yeah,
that's right. And I would say, that's my learning. That was my weakness. And now I'm trying. Again, I'm not saying I'm perfect in it, but like I definitely am much more aware, much more conscious of how I want this to be run, and what I think is the right way to do it compared to sort of how I used to maybe do things.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what that cost you when to be in that period before you took on board the learning and adjusted your behavior? What was that pain like? What was that costing you?
Oh, look, it's I think when it dawns on you what's going on, I think it's actually it's quite sad, really, because you sort of realize that I guess it would be a bit like if I was on Big Brother and I was to watch myself on TV, I'd probably be quite horrified, right?
Right.
If you hear yourself, you see yourself, you're just like, your perception of yourself in your head, and then the perception that what other people see and what you give off can be very different, right? And so I think that is also part of that learning of, well, what is it that I think I'm saying and what is it that people are actually seeing and hearing? And look, the reality of it is, I think sometimes the damage is done, right? You've pigeonholed yourself. You've sort of shown a side of how you operate, and people are people, right? They might have made their mind up and seen someone else do it better, and you get written off, right? And so what was the price I paid? I mean, I ultimately I had to move on. Like it was just not possible to turn that around. Maybe I didn't want to, there's probably sort of other reasons. But yeah, it can be quite severe, right? So yeah, I think but that that's okay as well. I think the idea of staying in a job for 20 years and getting it perfect for 20 years, that's probably sort of something of the past now as well. And so that's good, right? So you're in a job, you do what you do, you have your learnings. Hopefully, if you want to, you can recover from that and mature in that organization, or you move on. And that, I think both are okay.
So Dom, you mentioned just before, people are people. You said about finding the right people. You said some people like lunches, some people don't. So my question is, once you've found the right people, how do you keep them?
So the easy one is obviously money and remuneration and all that sort of stuff. But what's interesting about startup is those are all the things that you don't have, or are in very limited supply. So it has to be all the other stuff that keeps them. And I think some people love the fact that they're getting, someone that might be super junior in terms of the beginning of their career is working with someone that's, almost like a veteran in their career. And these two people are working together, colliding, all that, both sides are learning about that, right? In a corporate, there might be, I don't know, 3 or 4 levels of management between those two people. Whereas in a startup, those two people are pretty much side by side. And so I think some people love that and they thrive on it and they enjoy that freedom. And so that motivates them to stay, and they want to embrace that way of working. And I think some people just have a character where they just don't like that, right? They just want to do their 9 to 5. They just want it to be very sort of boxed in. This is what I do. I don't do anything else. And again, that's absolutely fine. It's just that's probably a slightly different environment to say the environment that we're in. And so yeah, and that's once you find those people that fit in that sort of way of working, then I think it generally is going to be successful.
So finding the right people that suit that kind of environment, very much autonomy and freedom. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great, Dom. We want to do a little thing called best boss, worst boss, and why. And no names, but I wonder if we could start with, who was your worst boss ever and why? What were those behaviors that just really rankled you or made it difficult to work with that person?
Yes, so my worst boss, it was actually pretty horrible. Like I thought I was doing a really, really good job, and they would, we talked earlier about sort of this micromanagement and all the rest of it, and they were like that. And it got to the point where I really didn't want to speak to them anymore. And I could see other team members with their bosses having a completely different situation and their work life and everything. It was so different, and it looked, I mean, maybe they had their issues, but from what I could see, it just looked so much better.
Right.
And I was like, why am I putting up with this? And I really tried. I wasn't shy, right? I actually I told them I didn't like this. I told other bosses I do want to work for them, but unfortunately it wasn't possible to change. It just didn't work out. But yeah, it was just this stifling, micromanaging, very sort of so I've done sort of various design type roles, and design type roles are, it's very sort of open type of thinking. You have your ideas and it's very open to interpretation, right? You might say, I'd like you to do this, and when it's fluffy design, which is sort of some of the roles that I did in the past, there's, A to B, there's 20, 30, 40 ways to get there, right? And it was always like my way of getting there and what he wanted it to be were just always completely the opposite end of this. Like we couldn't align. I tried, it just didn't work. So yeah, it was just awful. I don't think, the weird thing was I've met that person since then, and we actually, it's all fine. Like we're all polite and it's all great. But yeah, we've never really talked about why it was the way it was. Like, and I wish it worked out differently, but I did try it, but it just didn't work out.
It's a real thing, and it's a very common challenge.
And the one thing that it made, the one sort of positive I take away from that experience was that I sort of said to myself, I will never do that to someone. Like I'd rather fire them and just go, you know what, just go. Like don't then try and do what happened to me, because it's like it's death by 1,000 cuts, and it's just really not the right way to do it.
I love it. I'd never do that to somebody else. That's a good takeaway.
Never do that to something. It was pretty awful,
yeah. Do we give him a chance to do a good boss, Glenn? I mean, we've done the bad boss. What about the other side of the coin?
Yeah, who was your best boss or there might be more than one potentially?
Yeah, no, luckily I've had a lot of good bosses, but I would say one in particular that was really good, that really stood out for me. And I think this, like in my mind, I'm just working out that there's this common theme of this sort of empowerment type trust type sort of thing going on. It was still relatively early in my career. I joined this really big organization. They were doing all these wonderful things. I moved into a team I really wanted to be in, so I was super excited to be in this team. They were doing some great, awesome stuff, and this guy was heading up this team. And again, we just got on really, really well. The team was new, so I guess it had that sort of slightly startup feeling to it, even though it was within a huge organization. And he just he told me what he needed and what he wanted, and he just let me get on with it. And it was just great. And it was that everything that we talked about earlier, those ideas, all those sort of things that we talked about, that was kind of happening in that role. And it was great. Like it was just, I loved that job, and it was a great time in terms of how industries were operating and what was going on. And so it was just, I just have super fond memories of that whole.
That's great. Period. But again, we return to this freedom, this trust, this letting people find their own way, and that fine line between being visible and meddling. And I think that's a really important theme from our discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've just talking about it has sort of really reaffirmed that in my mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of summarizing some of the things you mentioned there, this idea of the vision, and you've got the vision, but it's a matter of the other people understanding the vision as well, and new team members. And you mentioned about explaining the goals so that they really share that vision with you. And once they understand that, it's about assisting them to get there, but then allowing them the space to be able to get there in their own way. So let them focus on what they want to do. And as you mentioned before, I suppose the key theme there is trust and ability to trust them and give them freedom. So Dom, in a startup, people get into startups because they're passionate about the product or an idea, and they've got this great idea they want to bring to the world. Doesn't necessarily mean they want to be a leader, but they find themselves a leader in a business. They're leading a new business, and then eventually they find themselves a leader of a team of people. So from your experience, what advice would you give those people who are about to enter a startup and find themselves as a leader?
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky that I'm a co-founder, and so because there's that other person, Ben working with me, and we talked about earlier on sort of you carve your own niche and whatever, and you start to realize what your strengths and weaknesses are specifically within the startup that you're working on. And so that's when it's really good, because you can sort of say, okay, well, you're much better at this than I am, so you just do that, right? But I guess, and this is where I'm a little bit in awe of solo founders. Like I don't know how you do that, right? I'm not sure. Well, obviously there are people out there who do all of it, but I certainly don't think I could. And so maybe that's sort of part of that sort of self-selection process that you have to go through yourself. It's like you're either confident enough and self-sufficient enough that you're going to be able to do all of this yourself, and so wonderful, or you might realize that actually there are certain things that you can't do. And so you do have to find that person, whether that's, someone you employ, a co-founder, maybe even a third-party service that you sort of lean on. And there's lots of those kinds of things out there, to try and sort of fill the gaps where you think, you're going to be not 100%. And so that's personally sort of how I try and deal with it. It's like, I don't think I can do everything.
Yeah, which I think is another theme of the session as well. You can't do everything yourself, so don't try.
Don't try. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, you've got to, but people do, right? But then maybe even if you do it all yourself and you are doing a good job, I think you're going to burn out a lot quicker because it's just so intense. I think you've got to seek help.
That's great. Dom, it's been great having you on with the show, especially for our first episode. Really wonderful conversation. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. Let us know about Rental Heroes. Where can we find you? How can we support you? Let's have a nice plug.
So Rental Heroes, our website is rentalheroes.com.au. We're actually about to rebrand to RE Heroes because we started off focusing on tenants, but now our services encompass every sort of part of the real estate life cycle. So we're actually becoming Real Estate Heroes, RE Heroes. So that's coming very soon. And we are the #1 natural language and AI conversation automation platform for real estate. So what does that mean? That means that we've built a chatbot called Alex, and Alex is there to help real estate businesses really take care of all of the mundane, repetitive tasks, mainly the conversations that are coming in, the inquiries that are coming through, and Alex can basically take care of them. He's super smart. He'll basically manage all your tenant inquiries, all the tenant maintenance, go straight through into your existing systems. So you don't need to have a new system to use Alex. Alex just basically plugs in. And Alex will also generate new leads for you. So one of our most popular services is real estate agents advertise their properties on realestate.com.au and on Domain. They have a huge number of email inquiries that come through the ads that are on there. Alex is able to respond to 80% of those inquiries. So typically most agencies are responding to those inquiries themselves. It's hugely intensive. The inquiries are super repetitive. You imagine Alex comes along and 80% of those inquiries have been answered, and you're confident that those 80% have been answered correctly, so much so that you don't need to worry about that 80%. So you just focus on the 20% that's really important for your business. So that's huge. Like it's absolutely massive. So it's chatbots, emails, all your maintenance is all taken care of by Alex.
Wow, wish I had that when I was renting.
Dom, great to have you on, and thank you so much for being our first guest for our first episode. It means a lot to have you with us.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. It's been wonderful to talk to you about this. I think it's hugely important, and I really hope that there's some useful insights there for others who are sort of in a similar situation.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Dom.